Welcome back to Singletrack. We've been off air for the last 10 days, taking a nice little break as far as regular podcasting goes, but the tank is filled with unleaded stoke. Wait,
leaded stoke.
Is unleaded inferior, Brett?
I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's probably, I have no idea. I just feel like leaded's more.
Which one is 91?
Well, high octane.
High octane diesel.
Okay, high octane.
Oh wow, yeah. I was going for like the race fuel, like out in the boonies outside of my parents' house. There's this one gas station in the middle of nowhere that actually has a pump for like 98 octane race fuel, and all the Bay Area people with their Lamborghinis go there and rip through the canyons, and they pay like $20 a gallon for that. So we're full of that.
Funny story, really quickly. In high school back in Maine, I pumped gas at the last full service station. I think it closed in 2013 or 14. And when I was in college and I was building my resume, because I pumped gas there for 4 or 5 years, I changed the title on my resume from gas station attendant to liquid petroleum transfer engineer. And that got me so in the door of so many companies and interviews. It was amazing. Anyways, whatever the good fuel is, that is what we are filled up on today. We're back to recap the 2024 UTMB World Series. We'll probably talk across the board, OCC, CCC, UTMB. Personally, I was mostly tracking UTMB due to all the scheduling constraints in my life. But I think how the episode is going to work, we're just going to kind of trade takeaways all episode long, riff off each other as we see fit, because we want to be chill like that. So with that said, Brett, I hope this podcast introduction finds you well, as they say in the corporate emailing world. What do you want to talk about first?
Oh man. Do we want to do, not necessarily like a recap of all the races, but like, should we do just how much OCC and CCC did you watch?
Little to none.
Or pay attention to, like, would you,
mostly watched the exit interviews on Free Trail, I Run Far, and some of the quickly posted highlight reels on UTMB. I was mostly invested in the full loop just because we had a lot going on the home front these past couple of days.
I watched a lot of OCC. CCC is kind of a nightmare to watch on the West Coast. I got to watch the last few hours of it, but the race starts at midnight here Pacific time. OCC was interesting because it was pretty warm, and like there was the utmost suffering there. Like usually you see suffering just because it's a 5-6 hour race, and that's pretty high intensity, but to see Eli Hemming like legitimately stop and take a breather twice on the last climb as he's in first place, and his gap to Francesco Pupi is just disappearing. I was screaming at my computer because like it was just so dramatic, and I feel like that's looking back on it, it really set the tone for what the next few races were gonna look like. And I'm surprised. Well, actually, I don't know if I was racing UTMB and I was watching OCC and to see like the suffering that happened out there, I'm curious if I would have changed up my race strategy at all.
Yeah.
By the way, with Eli, the shoe choice, that he was at a mechanical advantage in OCC. If you watch his conversational pace.
Adidas Terex Speed Ultra for the win there. I did see he was getting a little wobbly on that last descent. Like there was a couple times where I thought he was going to roll off the cliff because, he was getting bounced around. But Jeff, what were you going to say?
I was just going to say, considering it's Tuesday and we're a couple days post race, I feel like we don't need to do as much of a recap as we should do some takes from the weekend. But OCC being, maybe the highlight in some ways was one of my takes. I think it was a really competitive race on the men's and the women's side. And I know Remy fell and got hurt, but that race, like with Christian Allen just taking it out, guns blazing, he led for nuts. Whatever, the first like 15 kilometers, just like running like a bat out of hell. I think the men's OCC had a really interesting race dynamic, and it seemed like people were racing as if it was like a 2-hour race. and it was fully a 5-hour like suffer, knowing those climbs toward the end for how hard they were pushing early. It was pretty wild to see. For OCC, the only other takeaway I have is that the 10th place female, Anastina Erkila, when I heard that name come across the screen, I was like, get out of town. That is such a cool name. I want the name Anastina. Meow Yao knocked it out of the park in the women's OCC. It sounds like pretty much the same move as last year, but yeah, the men's is worth revisiting, Finn.
Yeah.
For sure.
We were talking just a bit before we started recording. Meow Yao, at least from like an American viewer standpoint, has had a silently incredible long career of very high level racing.
Yeah,
maybe 2018. I mean, we were looking back at Katie Schide's history at CCC, second place there in 2018. I think ran 12:20 something, only to be eclipsed by Meow Yao at that same race. She won, I think, ran under 12 hours. It was the year Tom Evans won on the men's side. She's been in it a while.
Yeah, which Katie does not have that CCC or OCC win, but she has second at both of those. And Meow Yao now has victories at both OCC and CCC, which no discredit to Katie Schide. I think getting the course record at UTMB is about as big as it gets in the sport, and to have a second victory there is just all time. I did follow the last like 2 hours of CCC because I woke up at 5 o'clock or whatever and saw like how things were panning out and was like, oh, this is actually an awesome race. But UTMB, like, I didn't want to go to sleep for that long because I wanted to check in and see how Katie and Jarmon were doing with the epic attempt at the couples victory. Yeah. Katie just delivered maybe the best UTMB index like performance, or just generally like trail running performance I've seen in context with her victory at Western States earlier this year.
It was so fun to watch. And yeah, like you said, I did not sleep very much this past weekend. A cool stat that was floating across social media that I just thought was really awesome and worth repeating was that last year's women's OCC podium swept all the major races this year, with Tony McCann, Meow Yao, and Katie Schide each all winning, OCC, CCC, and UTMB.
Yeah.
Which that's just cool.
Super cool. The only notes I have written down for either OCC or CCC revolve around CCC and the fact that it was a golden ticket race this year. I know it's way too early to be talking about Western States, but yeah, 6 golden tickets.
It's never too early.
6, was it 6 tickets up for grabs?
Yeah, it was a super
6.
golden ticket race.
Super golden ticket race. And maybe one of the only certainties we know, because I think some people are still contemplating whether they're going to take it or not, is Adam Peterman will be back at Western States next year, which is amazing. Mm-hmm. The fact that, and also from what I understand, he knew heading into CCC that this was a golden ticket opportunity and he was going to shoot his shot here. So not only was he there to participate in a World Series final, the 100K distance, he was also there to redeem a missed opportunity at the Canyons 100K earlier this spring. Who would have thought that, Adam Peterman has a tough day back in April, finishes, I think, 12th or 13th in that golden ticket race at Canyons, is not able to participate in this year's Western States. But, 3 months post-race, we're already talking about Adam Peterman getting his groove back and possibly being in another front-runner position to race along the likes of Hayden Hawks, who is definitely confirmed back. Maybe Jim. Mm-hmm. I don't know exactly if he's going to continue this defending of his title quest, but that was amazing. But I think there's a lot of speculation, or at least uncertainty, around like Peter Frano and Zhang and Tony McCann and Roseanne. I don't know exactly if decisions have been made there, but that one stuck out to me. Yeah,
I kind of feel like Adam, it was not surprising to me. He is incredibly good, and getting his feet back under him is great to see. I know it's not easily done, but when you think about the Hoka lineup or potential of Hoka lineup for UTMB next year, I am not one to say Rod's finish like this year was like, an outlier. Like, I think Rod has the consistency to show up year after year and put that down. But between Jim, Rod, Hayden, Adam Peterman, and Yeah, I mean the list goes on. Hoka could try a top 5 sweep at Western States. That'd be pretty good optics.
Yeah, it's kind of nutty how many of the same type of runner they have. I guess if you've got the budget for it, why not just take everyone you can? But it's just, I thought it was just interesting. But
it's a little different, right? Like from setting
there's
up
no
your
salary
team
caps.
Yeah. They're not setting up a team necessarily to have 100-mile men, 100K men, 50K men, sub-ultra men, and, the same for women. They're just like, all right, let's sign these folks, get the big names. I know,
it's too bad. It's too bad trail and ultra running is such a nice group of people, or else there would be some real inter-team drama if this was like elite, like professional cycling or something. If there was like 5 Tades on the same exact team, all trying to win the Tour de France, like,
or 5 Primos. Tade might take it all in stride, but Primoz would not. On CCC, Hayden Hawks delivered just like a world-class performance. And I think this year so far, Hayden is just on fire. That was so cool to see. I was so excited for him. Like, what a stellar and commanding victory. And it's like, it's cool to see. Was it 2019 Hayden Hawks that won CCC, or 2017?
2017.
Yeah. Like, I remember being in the sport at that point and being like, wow, Hayden is like, the best, if not one of the best in the world. And this past weekend, it was like, yeah, dude, Hayden's just like full speed back. Such an amazing race. And that field was super strong. I was tracking for a little bit in terms of US participation, not that we're strictly covering American runners, but Zach Gardner was like up there in the top 10 representing Salt Lake until pretty deep. I think past Trion. He was the second American after Hayden, and Dakota chipped away at him, and I think he faded late in the race. But cool to see Zach Gardner and Christian Allen show up on the big stage. I would throw Grant Barnett in there too, in their respective races for the Wasatch, and like give it very honest tries and shoot your shot.
Caleb Olson as well.
Caleb Olson. Yeah.
I put Caleb maybe in a slightly different category of like, I kind of expect it from him. I actually had him established. Him as our top American in my, free trail fantasy.
For sure. Yeah. Dude, yeah, Hayden's run, like, I think, like, if I were to, grade a lot of not grade a lot of ones, but just like give categories, like, I think Katie's run was like the most aggressive and just like putting the stamp on the field type run. Hayden's was like the smoothest run from what I saw, in terms of him like not going out too hard, slowly picked off the field. I listened to his post-race interview with Dylan Bowman on the Free Trail podcast this morning. And, he mentioned at one point, like one of the early splits, that he was in a chase pack, but he was 10 minutes faster in 2017 than he was at this spot. And he was like, I feel like I'm actually in the right spot this time. And then he finished a few minutes faster this year. So it's like his ability to like really, looking at his Strava data too, like he wasn't blowing out the descents. He wasn't blowing out the climbs. He was like pretty smooth and even the entire way. And was just, looking at him come through the aid stations too, he was like, no stress, very quick. He didn't make any single like major move, no low points, like just steady the whole time. It reminded me a lot of like Rod's Canyons 100K this year.
This is, I think, a good switching point. Most of my notes are around UTMB. We got a flood of great ideas for this episode, so I can't take credit for really any of these. I mean, as we kind of put out the bat signal, people are giving us some great stuff. But a lot of it revolved around, and I had to steal this from our DMs, but someone called it DNF culture is now a mind virus that needs to be reckoned with in our sport, which cracked me up. But there's a really good example of sort of the trade-offs that are taking place at the highest end of the sport that I think we should consider here. I'll give you an example. And Brett, you know this acutely. Cole Watson, has a tough day out there, certainly does not necessarily run to his potential, finishes around 30th place. That is ultimately, he's going to take a UTMB index score penalty for just deciding that it's in his best interest, maybe from a mental standpoint, or just like I finish what I start standpoint to get it done. But the vast majority of people in his place might have opted to just like, whatever, drop midway through and collect their losses and try again elsewhere. What are your thoughts here? Like, do you think it's time to include DNFs in the UTMB index, in intra-score calculations? Do we have this like weirdly skewed version of where people stand in our sport because we're not factoring in something that happens pretty significantly at the top of the sport?
Well, Cole Watson's got that Rogue Valley blue collar work ethic. So there's just no two ways around that one. As for should DNFs be included in the UTMB index, I always wonder if all the people who continue to write that know that the UTMB index is taken from like, what is it, your 5 best races over the last X number of years. So like,
I think it's 3 to 5 over the last 3 years. So
if you're a dropout artist and you don't even have any good results, your index is still going to suffer. So, and I don't know, I think there's more toxicity that can come from including DNFs in your UTMB index than not, because if it's your job to put out good performances and start races, there's a lot to, there's a lot to your body that gets messed up if you're, trying to win the race, but it's not your day and something happens and now you're like, oh, my index is going to get hurt if I don't, jog the next 75 miles with mild rhabdo and my toenails are falling off. It's like, well, now that jacks up your next 6 months, maybe the forever of your running. Like a question I wrote was like, maybe the 3-year window is too long. Like, what if it was just 2 years? I don't know. Like, what if they shortened it?
I mean,
what do you think?
I have, like, personally, I feel like this topic definitely like resonates with me at the moment. Like I walked 29 miles of Western States before ultimately dropping out, and I'm still kind of working through the injuries that I had going into that race and, have had since that race. And I really felt like this weekend, like I was one of maybe like 2 or 3 elites, men's and women's field at Western States that dropped out. And then seeing the DNF list from UTMB of 16 or 14 of the top 20 men did not finish. And like 11 or whatever of the top 20 women did not finish. Like it is a very different playing field between UTMB and Western States. But like ultimately, when I chatted with like the race directors at States about me dropping out, they said just that, Brett. Like if you hadn't made that decision and you'd continued pushing yourself and you possibly ended up getting rhabdo, like we then are in a way more compromised place than like you need to know when to call it and to drop out. I don't feel great about extending or shortening that UTMB window in terms of your index. Personally, like this season, I had ambitions of racing 8 times. So far, I'm 9 months into the year and I have 1 race finish and 2 race starts. And like, that's a real bummer for me. I'm not excited about that, but I had 3 50Ks planned this year. I did 1 50K at the beginning of the year. It went well. I had a great 50K last year. Like to have scores across the extra short, medium, long, extra long distances, that's a lot of racing to be able to have scores in each discipline. And like, if we're talking shortening that window to 2 years, like, all right, that means you have to have 300-mile races, right? In the last 2 years, like really to have a competitive score. A standalone race doesn't do it for you. So I actually think the current system is pretty well set up. I think UTMB, a lot of folks are going into that race maybe in a similar position to like Jarmon Granger, who like I had Germont picked as my win for the race. He is so good. He's so calculated. And it was his year-long focus. He broke some ribs. He had a long lead up, hoping to be able to get to the start in the best case possible. And like, it's a race that you go all in on, you know, like I think it's the only race people really go all in on in that sense, where like the DNF culture, yes, it is higher, but it's higher because like you might be in Jim's position where like, hey, if I start, who knows, things could go well and I could finish. That was certainly where my mind was at with Western States.
Yep.
But like, that's the, like the game that you show up for. And a lot of this like sport to begin with is embracing uncertainty. We don't know how our bodies are going to respond out there. So like DNFs being counted in the UTMB index, I agree, Brett. I don't really think it's going to have any impact. You need finishes to have a good UTMB index. I think there are some ways where like DNFs could be dissuaded in, you know, other ways. Like that race like should show up if you search someone's UTMB index, like showing up as DNF, right? So you can see someone's history. Certainly if I was an international race director and making decisions about who I want to come to Ultra Trail Cape Town or Madeira, I would look and see like, oh, this person's DNF'd 7 times in the last 4 years. Like, I don't know if it's worth me putting race budget toward them.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think there's a sponsor component to it as well. There's a lot of pressure for athletes to show up to UTMB week to have more bodies wearing that brand's gears. Like Western States, I think is a different situation because it is such a select field. But yeah, I think part of the UTMB scene, like the just monster that UTMB is we're going to always see a lot of DNFs. Part of that is because that race is super hard. I wanted to quit very badly last year.
Jeff, do you think there's any, I don't know if it's like a mindset thing regarding, you know, like you said, like the small field at Western States, and they're kind of just being the honor and like, I'm going to try my best to get to that finish line. Like you clearly were doing that before it was like, my hamstring might rip off the bone here, or maybe it already was at that point. I'm not sure. Versus, you know, UTMB, you see a lot of DNFs oftentimes at this, you know, stake of being able to continue your season later, but also like, are they really taking a spot away from anyone if they drop out of UTMB? I mean, the field is so big and they set aside such a large number for elites. You know, it's like, you know, if we had 15 elites at Western States drop out, it's like, oh crap, that's like an actual percentage of the field. And then every person seems to be accounted for and scrutinized a little bit more. UTMB, it's, you know, it seems like it's such a big race where it's like, yeah, I mean, you put together that big of an elite field, everyone's going all in, like maybe some people go in kind of banged up, but also when you just have that sheer number of people, more shit's going to happen.
Yeah, I think that's where like it's the monster of UTMB. It's an enormous race, right? We're talking 1,700 people or whatnot versus 345. There's a culture at Western States, and like I hated every minute of it talking to aid station captains who are just like, yeah, you're not going to drop out here. Good luck. Keep on going. And like that culture, you know, as the recipient of it is like pretty both inspiring and like toxic and disheartening. It's like, no, I know my body and like I really need to end things here. But there's also some aid stations that are just not accessible. So I understand that. I don't think the race, you know, is telling the aid station captains at UTMB, like, you know, put them in a bed for 10 hours, make sure like, you know, make sure like they're quitting, like, because they're injured, not like, oh, they're too tired or whatnot. Like this isn't a race where their goal is to have the highest, you know, finishing percentage. And I admire Western States for that, but it's a totally different thing. And that's like UTMB is a monster. It's enormous. Every race is super big. It's not taking a spot. And it doesn't feel like if you drop out of UTMB, I dropped out of CCC in 2019. I wasn't like, oh, I just took a spot from someone else who like would have done anything to be here. Maybe I'm like a privileged piece of shit for thinking that, but at Western States, I certainly felt that way. It's like, like I put 5 months of like rehab into getting to this start line, like to give it my best shot. And I still like know how much, Tim Tollefson wanted to start that race. And I was, one of 8 people or whatnot that would have had to not start for him to get that spot or whatnot. So I think the culture is a little different between UTMB and generally like races in the US. Like, would you feel that way at Black Canyon, dropping out of Black Canyon? Probably not, really, right? It's a huge race.
It just seems, again, to me, it seems like the current incentives are either, as a pro, I either have my dream day or it's over. And you can almost categorize the people at the very front of the sport who couldn't tolerate like an 11th to 15th place finish, which I bet they would register if they had hung on. And one of the examples that comes to mind for me, although she's consistently been on the podium despite all sorts of things working against her, is Marianne Hogan. Like, I love her style of racing where even though things from like a physical standpoint go catastrophically wrong in the second half of these races, is able to compartmentalize. And it's like, oh, wow, I just totally dislocated my finger. No, I'm not dropping. I'm going to work through this. Oh, like, my sacrum is stress fractured or whatever. Like, I'm going to hobble to the finish. And like, she sticks with it and gets it done. And she's kind of one of the rare counters to this. I mean, Abby Hall also sort of muscled through a finish the other day. I'm not saying DNF or
throw
die.
It back to Killian, like dislocating his shoulder at Hard Rock and like finishing. I actually don't think that Abby Hall or Marianne or like Killian are the exceptions. And I don't know a lot of the top runners on the guy side who DNF'd and what their reasons were. I know basically that Jim and Jarmon both were working through injuries. And like, that's, in my opinion, not something to risk, because when you're at Courmayeur and you're working through an injury, you basically have a full, 100-mile effort ahead of you. It's so far from the finish. There's so much vert. And like, yeah, it's, in my opinion, there's no way it's worth it. But a lot of that's like, Ludo didn't get to where he is by like DNFing a bunch, right? Like, these trials and tribulations, like, you need to go through those to learn how to race better. And, there's a couple runners who are in the top field of the field who year after year, like, show up and they're like, I'm going to go for the win. And then they DNF. And like, I wonder if they could actually learn a huge lesson by like suffering it in. And not to say like Jim's 4th or 5th place finishes were like bad finishes, but yeah, he had different goals those years and he finished it to like learn some of that lesson. Huge kudos to like Drew Holman for bringing it all the way around the loop. Your first time running UTMB, that's the goal. If you have goals that are to win, I mean, Vincent Bouillard, like, that's amazing that he won his first UTMB. And it's also amazing that we're 30 minutes into an episode and we didn't mention Vincent Bouillard like winning in the way he did. But your goal's got to be just to finish. It's an incredibly humbling, huge effort.
Yeah, it didn't sound like Vincent's primary goal or like only goal for the race was to win, which seemed to be the case with many of the other like quote unquote full-time professionals in the race. And yeah, kind of like to what you said, like, you kind of do need to learn how to finish before you can learn how to win. And many of these runners have learned how to do that, but the elite fields are getting so big so fast that there's a good portion who have yet to learn how to finish on a stage like that. And yeah, there's a lot of learnings that can be done in there. I mean, one thing that I was thinking of too that perhaps would contribute to a high DNF rate is, Finn, like what you were saying, like when like Marianne continues to stick it out or Killian sticks it out at Hard Rock after dislocating his shoulder. In those two circumstances, they're both still in the money at that point. Like if I'm in 20th at UTMB and like I know what my bonus structure is and it's 11th place, I'm probably getting $0 from my sponsor. From, if your job is to make a living as a professional runner, it's like, well, crap. If I continue on and get 15th or 20th or 30th here, I'm going home with nothing. Counter argument to what Brett just said 20 seconds ago, you're going home with finish experience. But, maybe you're going back to another race later this fall and putting some money in the bank account because you saved the legs a little bit. And like, that's a very tight line to walk between knowing like, what should I be dropping to go for later and whatnot? Because you don't want to make dropping from a race an easy habit to make either. And I think these are just all complications of the competitiveness of our sport. Like these are just all things that elite athletes now have to learn to navigate on a much more minuscule level than ever before. And that's just super difficult.
I don't know many brands that are extending a bonus structure to top 10. I know
that's also true.
Yeah, I know some brands stop it at top 3. And if we're talking about the elite fields being like ballooned and being gigantic, like, can you imagine dropping out of UTMB because you're in 7th place because you're not going to be in the money? Because like, you're a professional trail runner and you need that source of income. So you need to start thinking, oh, maybe I can get back and do Run Rabbit and cash in on some money. Like personally, and I'll say a couple things, Finn. One, I'm happy that I'm not in that position. I like running for like the spirit of running the race. And my goal is definitely to like finish and be the best competitor I can be. But part of that also is like, I do have a full-time other job. And 2, I've been on numerous calls or, podcasts with the two of you where we talk about the theme of attrition no longer being a thing in ultra running and that pro ultra runners are so committed at this point that they don't like show up and blow up. And gosh, watching just name after name show up on that DNF list over the weekend, I was like, I think everyone's searching for a why amongst the heat or these like external factors is missing the greater picture, which is like, there is an effort knowing like you've got to go sub 20 to be in the mix. I think we're seeing, and I'd love to chat with Liam about this and see if it actually like pans out. But I would guess that splits to Courmayeur are faster than they have been kind of previously. And that because folks are kind of en masse, not just one person pushing it faster earlier, you're seeing more carnage earlier. But that race is so hard. It's a very hard race. Even without the elements to like lead to attrition, it is like so challenging to both do the actual running and the sleep deprivation and the nutrition. It's got a bit of everything going on. And I would have been surprised if we saw as many DNFs in something like CCC or OCC. That I think would be more indicative of like, there's a problem with pro trail running culture where if you're not going to win, just give up. UTMB is such a different beast than those two races. And like, you're starting going into the night. I think the attrition is because it's a really hard race and folks are trying to go harder earlier. Not necessarily like the money, just look at Ludo time and time again to see like, it doesn't matter, or Cody Lind, like it doesn't matter where you are in Courmayeur, you can still be in the top 5, top 7.
A couple points to make here. One, to your point, Jeff, I think I performed a way too early funeral for the concept of attrition after Western States this year, just thinking that we had solved everything. We had solved world peace. We had solved nutrition. We had solved topical cooling.
Dying is dead.
Turns out I was totally wrong. Brett, to your point about like the depth of the race this year, one thing that I think deserves mentioning on this podcast is, I think we got a little, or maybe I got too sentimental about all of the big names that DNF'd this year, but because the field is so deep, it had no impact whatsoever on finishing times. Like everything was still totally world class.
That's super fascinating to me. A lot of the times you don't see both, where you have a high DNF rate, but then you also still see some of the fastest times ever. Usually you don't get both. And that's I was struggling to pick that one apart. But I mean, Jeff, you're making it a little more clear, and you're like, dude, the race is really hard. And if you're going out that hard in an already really hard race, it's just going to happen that way. Because you're right. Like if everyone was, time trialing the course and got to just do everything on their own, a third's probably still going to drop out. A third's going to have an average day, and maybe a third has good to better days. And that's when you eliminate the variables of competition and outside, stressors. But then when you add the racing element in, it's like that, those percentages swing even more. So, I think
it's interesting to look at the French runners and UTMB specifically, but also CCC and OCC and MCC. Like UTMB is like the pride of French trail running, right? Mm-hmm. And seeing 6 men in the top 10 from France for UTMB, like I'd be interested to know if like are the French elite runners DNFing at the same rate as kind of the global elite, because part of me thinks that race has a ton of pride for French runners and they're going to finish, and runners gave themselves the opportunity to show up, like Yannick or like Thibaut. Thibaut's one of the best runners in the world, like finishing in 14th or wherever he was, 12th, like that's still a phenomenal race. I think because it has more pride, maybe like Western States has a lot of pride for like US trail runners.
Okay. We need a speech from Denzel Washington from his Run of the Titans days where, everything we're going to do is changing. We're going to change the way we run. We're going to change the way we eat. We're going to change the way we block. We're going to change the way we tackle. We're going to change the way we win.
You drop the ball, you run a mile. You false start, you run a mile.
That's actually how I got into running. I was just super
That's how I know
football.
How many feet are in a mile, because of remember Titans. He's like, Petey, how many feet are in a mile? Like, I don't know, 5,280, and you're gonna run every single one of them.
Guys, I was like waiting. I was like, when is the movie reference coming in here? It's been so long. We haven't had anything. I think that was the speech that motivated Jim to move to France in the beginning, in the first place.
Yeah.
Changing the way you eat and train.
Change the way I hike.
UTMB on the women's race, I think, was it 9 different countries in the top 10? I think if
super international.
If UTMB wants to claim that they are the world championships of trail running, the women's UTMB distance is the best case for that. Because you look at that compared to the men's race with 6 Frenchmen in the top 10, and it's like, wow, this is like serious representation. And not to force a change of conversation or topic, but I think with looking forward to next year with World Mountain Trail Running Championships and UTMB in the same month, like it's interesting to think like, okay, some of the races this year really look like the world championship level at UTMB. How's that dynamic going to change next year, where it is like, for that world title competing for your country?
I bet 2025 OCC is going to be one of the greatest races of the year, because of how many people are just going to try and use that as a little prep tune-up race to get ready for Worlds. Like, I bet we see a lot of the the long mountain racers drop down to OCC.
Dude, I was thinking that.
probably in a situation where we never see these people run OCC ever, but we finally get to because of Worlds later. So maybe a not even a hot take for 2025, but OCC next year is going to be fire.
So I got to admit, you do this podcast long enough, you get a lot of stuff wrong. One of the things that I was probably wrong about, I think I said this after last year's UTMB, that as the years go on, not being a professional at these races is the equivalent of bringing a knife to a gunfight.
I wrote that down too.
Yeah, it's not aging super well, but it's complicated, right? Because on the men's side, Vincent is the shining example of this amateur, relatively speaking, an amateur who works inside Hoka as like a product developer. Running is clearly to some extent secondary to his professional life. He wins this race outright in a world-class time. But on the women's side, you look at that podium, every single one of those people, Katie, Ruth, Marianne, consummate professionals. Like, it doesn't get much more professional than the way they conduct themselves in the sport. So what do you think? Is are we just way too early on predictions that this is going to be like a super mercenary professionalistic type thing, or will there always be places for the Vincents of the world to come and just throw down and blow up everything we hold sacred?
That's the most important thing, right? Is like, do we keep the sport at this level where it's participation and pro in the same field? Because that opens that door of opportunity. And I think it's so cool.
That's
it's
a good point.
It's one of the best parts about trail running is like you get to line up with everyone. But if you look on the women's side, it's not just the top 3, Finn. I mean, we're looking, the top 10 are all like full-time trail running is what they do for a living. And with the exception of Vincent, like the other 9 top 10 men at UTMB are in that boat as well. But like, yeah, I mean, the like Lucy Bartholomew, Martina, Claudia, Sabrina, Emily Hogan, like Blondine, all of these ladies, like there's been, films about them and their like place in trail running. They are like the names of trail running in this very professional way. And that's not, considering just the level of professionalism that Katie, Ruth, and Marianne bring to the table. So I don't think you're wrong in that by any means. I hope we keep that door open to, potential random ballers.
So what about Vincent though? Like, does he actually just have the perfect complementary job to his running? Like full access to the latest and greatest running gear and tech. He gets to have an open door with some of the best runners. We're great friends with Jim, knows Hayden, like he's great friends with Tim Tollefson. Like from a mental standpoint, it almost seems like he gets to see behind the curtain more than most other people in regards to like what it does take to win a race like this. So it's like, I just be super curious, like what does a week of work and training look like for him? But it's like, well, maybe his job doesn't hurt him as a runner as much as, people make it sound. I imagine working for Hoka they probably have to promote running during your lunch break at least a little bit.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And to all our micro and macro economic friends out there, there is still no such thing as a free lunch. And you have to imagine that if he's not able to do it at lunchtime or sometime during the day at Hoka HQ, he's doing it at night or early in the morning. And there's massive trade-offs there that totally squash, in my opinion, some of the relatability things that make this story awesome, right? Like maybe he's doing stuff that in training that forces him to make sacrifices when it comes to other social opportunities or friends, family, whatever. Like whatever he's doing it at a high level. So I think that's, you got to, I respect that.
I want to learn more about him because like I just feel like there's more to the story here than just like this dude coming out and winning UTMB. Like it sounded like he was a steeplechaser in another life. Like that coordination and just willingness to run that event always seems to bring out the best in a lot of trail runners. It's like I would love to learn more about that background. And he's done a lot of like pretty ultra endurance like solo cycling type projects. So it's like maybe there was a culmination of a lot of the things that he did that contributed to this win way more than just a few of his most recent race results.
This is a question for both of you guys, because I think this is going to be a fascinating situation to monitor. Has there ever been anybody in this like newly professional era of ultra running that has had a breakthrough result like this and has had the opportunity to invest more into it, but has actually closed that door and maintained their prior life? Because if that's the case, if he ends up going this route of like, I am totally content, I may never even do this race or a Super Bowl-esque race again, that level of peace of mind and self-restraint, not saying it's like a bad thing to indulge, but I just think it'd be interesting if he does this and then drops the mic and walks away.
I mean, Kat Bradley comes to mind for like getting into Western States with a single lottery ticket and winning. She did stop teaching and she kind of committed to the full-time pro running. Andrew, who won the year at Western States, the gym took the wrong turn. Andrew Miller. Did Andrew Miller like lean into the full-time kind of pro running thing for a bit?
Yeah, he did, but it was almost too late for the type of training that he was doing, like just that era that he was in. It was almost just bad timing. What was the name that I was just thinking of?
Well, while you're thinking of it,
I mean, what about Skaggs? Like, I guess that was just like,
Kyle Skaggs.
Kyle Skaggs,
I was thinking like
to
True
win.
Heart Brown.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, God. What is he? Where are they now, True Heart Brown? I want to do that episode.
I mean, I think he's still fighting fires.
He's fighting
being
fires.
like a great dad.
Yeah, I know. It's like, and it's maybe not exactly as similar situation to Vincent's UTMB win, but that was the name. Yeah, like True Heart Brown. Yeah, it's interesting because I feel like the question hadn't really been asked to Vincent much of like, do you want to be a professional runner now and like do this full time, or like you want to just like keep doing your thing?
It's like
I think
the scene
he was asked that in the.
He was?
Sorry, go with your movie quote.
Oh, well, I was just going to reference Dazed and Confused when they're driving in the car, jamming to Low Rider, and the guy's like, thought I wanted to be this like ACLU lawyer, but I just want to dance.
I do think in the Free Trail podcast he was kind of asked about that, and he I'm pretty sure he addressed it, that like he likes his job and likes what he does, and 1954 is really fast though.
Yeah, like, it's really fast.
Yeah,
it's very good
to be in the likes of Killian, Jim, Matthew, and Zach Miller. Like, those are some of the all-time greats, and just watching. I think I was texting you two, like, saying like, can you guys believe Vincent's still winning, going up Col de Ferret? Like, the next lowest UTMB score in the race was Katie Schide. And like the two of them at that point were both in the top 10 with kind of like 830 and 826 or so. And such a knockout performance. And also somewhat indicative that like, again, if you're not working to keep up a UTMB score or like trying to, like actually have a solid array of races across the scores, like you can punch way above your weight. And I think we see that, with some frequency of a runner who like shows up and you see their name on the start list and you're like, oh crap, they might not be like toward the top on Free Trail Fantasy, but then you're like, wait, they're definitely gonna be in the mix.
Yeah. Oh, that was the other name of like someone who put out a world-class performance but isn't really pursuing a professional contract. David Roach after Leadville. I mean, I know he's already had kind of quote unquote a professional career, but like after his professional running career is over, he has the best race of his life. And then it's like, no, I like the balance that I'm in. I'm just going to keep like basically sponsoring myself.
That's probably the best modern example right there. That's a good one. I like the Skaggs one too. The Skaggs one is good to see. He just walked away from the sport altogether. He's like, done.
Yeah, I got what I wanted. David's a good example. And also I love that quip of like, well, I want to be able to run in whatever shoes I want.
Yeah. No, it's true. It's a good point. I mean, I think there was a good one on your Instagram story call out, Finn, of like, why did Jim even start the race?
Yeah. And
I mean, if he doesn't start the race, he, to quote Michael Scott, you miss 100% of the chance. There's 100% of the shots you never take. Like Jim has 0% chance of winning the race if he doesn't start it. Yeah. And if it's, they were pretty vague on like what the knee injury was, but it sounded like it was like kind of like an inflammation type deal. And it's like, it probably felt fine at the start of the race, but it's one of those things where it's like, is it going to blow up or is it not going to blow up? If there's a chance of it not blowing up, you're absolutely starting the race.
I think there's a great quote that's the opposite of faith. The opposite of faith is certainty. And like, can you toe the line of a 100-mile race with certainty that you're going to win? Like, no,
never.
but you do want to have faith in the training you've done and like your ability, as well as just like self-belief, and like try to have that place of confidence, whether you're like, oh, I've had like a nagging injury, or, oh, I like in my taper, I all of a sudden start feeling terrible, which like pretty much always happens to me in my taper. I'm just like, I feel so bad. I'm pretty sure both my legs are broken. Keeping a quiet mind and a confident headspace of, I'm going to put my best foot forward here and like kind of play the ball as it lies. Like, see how things go. You have to show up for that opportunity. And like, it's uncertainty for every single person on the starting line. It didn't seem that way with Katie this year at UTMB. She was like, 15 minutes ahead, 20 miles into the race, which is just absolutely crazy. I think there was a point where she was like within a couple minutes of Germain near like Notre Dame.
They were so close to overlapping at, I think it was like the second or third aid station. Like he exited as she was coming in. And I was like, oh, it would have been so cool to see them at the aid station together, like 25 miles into UTMB.
But like that's a level of like, maybe that's the 10,000 hours part of it. Like when Courtney shows up, Finn, are you going to bet against her?
Done it once.
Yeah. And it didn't work out well.
Regretted it for the rest of your life.
Like that's the level of like pro you've reached. If you see Killian's name on the start list, like there's a good chance Killian's going to have a knockout performance. And like his experience and like his record states that, otherwise, like we're showing up, like those people also are embracing this uncertainty, but like it's a real mental game showing up to a start line. And whether you're in the best shape of your life or, you have a little bit more doubt, you still have to kind of like commit. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if it was in the Instagram call out, Finn, or I just saw it across like a lot of social media over the course of the race at UTMB. There was a lot of talk about Ruth Croft going out too conservative. What do you guys think about that?
So she talked about this in her I Run Far post interview. She said she poured over all of the historical data on this race, and one of the big things that was evident to her was that everybody positive splits this race. There is a lot of slowing down that happens in the second half of this race after Courmayeur. And 1 second, I'm getting a call here. Decline that. There's a lot of attrition that happens in the second half of this race, and there's no need to front run or take any unnecessary risks in the first half. And I think she stuck to that plan. She just trusted her abilities in the second half. You saw that. I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but she was looking really, really, really strong. And I have to imagine those last 2-3 hours of the race from like Triant, Valorsine onward were probably the strongest of anyone in that top 10.
Jeff, what do you think?
I think she ran like a absolute masterclass of a race. And were it not for Katie's like pretty much perfect performance, I mean, look at everyone in the men's race that dropped out. What was the likelihood of Katie finishing? Like, I don't know if it's, binary, it's 50%. Like she either finishes and keeps it together on this ridiculous course record pace, or she doesn't. Like, I think Ruth ran and executed incredibly well. And like, that's how I would want to race, especially stepping up to that race for your first time.
Yes.
I think going out and trying to stay with Katie on a course that she's run, 3 times and already like won and, knows much more intimately than you is kind of like, getting in a dog fight in another dog's yard or whatnot. I don't know. That's not a great analogy, but it's kind of like, when Hayden went toe to toe with Jim at Western States and Jim just played with him like he was a dog toy.
Yeah.
Like he knows the zones to take advantage. And I would say the same thing would have happened if Ruth tried to push it with Katie early. Like Katie's biggest opponent in that race was going to be herself. And she either was going to line it up and have a perfect race or things would go sideways. She had a perfect race. I will not bet against Katie Schide ever again. And I typically don't, but it's like been years now of being like, wow, my friend Katie's like about as good as it gets. And then there's Courtney on a different level and no longer. I think so far her season has just proven that she is on the level of the very top of the sport.
One quote to share about Ruth, and then a couple interesting stats on Katie. So I was watching Ruth finish on the live stream, and it's probably unfair to take people at their word for what they're saying after they finish a 100-mile race, but she was interviewed by Martin, and Martin is sort of pressing her on whether she'll come back to this race in 2025. And she says, no, I definitely will not do that again. So
she said that about States.
She said that about States too. So, it's probably nothing, but interesting that, that was her initial
thought. Maybe
Ruth,
the thought too could be like, wow, I ran a good race. Like it was very complete. And like, Jeff, I agree with you. Like a lot of people are like, oh, Ruth gave herself no chance to win by going out this slow and being over an hour behind Katie at halfway. It's like, well, in your first like true UTMB start, are you seriously going to write splits around a time that nobody's ever hit before? It's like,
yeah,
how do you pour around? How do you make splits around that kind of data? Like
that's
Ruth looked at.
That's some Jack Quenzel shit. Like,
yeah,
that's
like
someone
Ruth,
who's like projected the course like a dozen times and knows every steps and like knows what they're capable of on the best potential day.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think Ruth did. I would be hard pressed to believe that Ruth could run faster than she did this past weekend if she just tries to go out with Katie and is like, oh no, I'll probably just fade to 23 minutes slower than Katie or whatever the distance or the time differential ended up being at the end. It's like, I don't think that's the case. I think Ruth probably ran about the best race she could have and executed damn near perfect splits. And it's like what Katie did out there, like that, that doesn't really affect Ruth's race. And, I think that also goes to show like the mental tenacity that, Ruth has and being able to be an hour behind the leader, like way into the race and just keep chipping away and, end up overtaking second, like pretty late and still running historically one of the fastest times ever.
Okay.
Especially for their debut UTMB.
Exactly. Yeah.
I think I'd also like to push back a little bit against like the contingent, however large it may be, of people who are like, well, if she'd just gone out harder earlier and then just like eaten more, then she could have like fueled to do that. Like anyone who's just like, oh, eat more. Like, if you looked at David Roche's Leadville, you might be like, oh, all these people have to do is just eat way more and like they can run way faster. And like anyone that's saying that about David or like Rod's performance at Western States is also discrediting the huge amount of training they put in to like get there. I would be so thrilled with the race that Ruth ran. And like she should be. That's got to be up there with the best, if not one of the best debut UTMBs ever.
Yeah, like if it was just simply a matter of eating more, then like Joey Chestnut and Takeru Kobayashi would be the top two ultra runners of all time.
I did get that quip from Katie, like she was the first person who I heard say like, it's actually just a long distance eating competition. And it is one of my favorite like statements, it's proving ever true.
So Katie has only lost twice since 2022. She lost to Tony at OCC last year, Courtney at Western last year as well, but she's been on a tear. I think it's interesting also that she hasn't really had anyone in the women's race to race against any of these things. So I think she ran with Courtney through maybe Robinson Flat or a little bit further than that last year. Mm-hmm. Maybe you could say in the very early moments of this year's race, she was with like Blandine and that crew, but definitely not by like Saint-Gervais. So interesting. I mean, we use the phrase in their own class quite a bit, but I would say Katie's like with like Jim and stuff, but Katie's truly living it. Like except for the men's race around her, which is also the front of that race, she's on her own island. It's wild.
Yeah. I mean, it seems like at the top end of the women's sport, there's more like total dominance than at the top end of the men's sport.
I mean, I would have put like a considerable amount of money on Remy Bonnet winning OCC, right? Like that is someone that I think would be a like sound bet. I think he is in a different class at that distance, but to then see Eli Hemming have over 15 minutes on the rest of the field, like that was an all-time, performance, and he was able to hold it together to like 2 minutes and 40 seconds or whatnot. But I think we still do see some of that on the men's side as well. But like again, we're talking slightly different situations. Like,
is it Brett? Do you think it's fair nowadays to put Katie and Courtney in the same class, and if they do ever race again, you have to pick against one of them, right? Like, have we reached that point of the sport where you like in fantasy free trail, it's like, I think I'm actually going to put Katie first for this race, and here's why, or it's like Courtney and here's why, and it's more of like a justification as opposed to either like previously it was a no contest, no question type thing. Like if Courtney's in a race, it's hers to lose. Is it more complicated now?
Dude, I don't remember what movie, but maybe you can help me out. This is where it's either John C. Reilly or Will Ferrell's like, it's mind-boggling. And they're like, what? Mind-boggling. Where your thoughts are all trapped up in a bottle.
Isn't that Talladega Nights?
That's what I thought. I couldn't remember if it was Kicking and Screaming, Talladega Nights, or even like Blades of Glory maybe. But anyways, that's how I feel, where it's like my thoughts are all up in my head like a pretzel.
Blades of Glory.
Super underrated movie, by the way.
I would say that for me, it would come down to the race. If neither of them have run Swiss Alps before and they both go and toe the line, I probably would put my bet on Courtney. If it's Swiss Alps and I know that Katie has been training there and projecting that course, I think the margins suddenly shift in Katie's favor. Like the training block that she did for Western States this year, being in Flagstaff and committing in that way. I think this year's Western States, Katie versus Courtney would have been really interesting. Same with UTMB this year. And when that does happen, it'll be really cool to see. I still have a dream that World Mountain Trail Running Championships would like actually be an American lineup of like Courtney and Katie competing in the same race, like for Team USA, which would be super cool. But yeah, who knows how that will all play out with the timing of it next year. But yeah, neutral ground that neither of them are super familiar with, and neither of them knows where the race is going to be. Courtney, if they know where the race is going to be and Katie's done what she's been doing, which is just these incredibly calculated training blocks, Katie.
Ooh, I like that. I like that assessment of, depending on the race and the circumstance for it.
I feel like Katie works within a realm of like eliminating margin of error down to the point where like it's incredibly calculated. I feel like Courtney works in a realm of like, I'm off the couch, like I'm going to go like do something fully magical. And right now I'm probably discrediting the huge amount of work that Courtney puts in, but she does make it seem like effortless. And part of that's probably the mystery and allure of not knowing her training.
Yeah, totally.
Couple more things on Katie before we transition. This was also from her iRunFar interview. I did not realize how much the extent of her travel the last, I think, 6 months. So she said in that interview, she spent only 3 weeks at home since early April, which is wild to me. So this is being a pro athlete, it's like being on tour, and especially with the advent of these really, committed training camps, there's a lot that goes into it. That was number one. Number two, this quote, I would love to have a bib for Hard Rock, end quote. So that
she has said that a few times now.
But love is a strong emotion. So,
if I know anything, it's
time to bust out the card stock for Katie.
Yeah. If I know anything, it's important that whenever you have a microphone in front of you to say out loud, that I am interested in a bib at Hard Rock. And I haven't done that plug myself yet. So just throwing it out to the universe in case Dale's mowing his lawn and listening to this. Like, how cool would it be for Jeff and Katie to get to race Hard Rock together? Both Middlebury geology alums. Let's go. Could be a cool story. Mining history involved. Geology, rocks for jocks.
You're right.
Come on.
It's a good point. It's a good point.
Last thing. I have not asked Katie, but I bet she would corroborate this. I don't think this was a perfect race for her. From what I heard, she did want sub 22 at this race. Didn't get it. Those last 2 hours from, I think, Valor's scene were very challenging. She had to kind of gut it out. So I still think even with an amazing, massive, 20, 30 minute course record, there was still some ambition left out on the course, which is interesting.
Yeah. I mean, watching her final descent, she was limping like most of the way down. Like she was taking like twice as many steps with her right side than her left. Cause or something like that. One of her knees was definitely starting to go on that last descent. And, that was like almost 10 minutes there probably. But,
even just like, throughout the whole day, she was just moving up and up. And from Triant onwards, she kind of went from the 10th place zone and started getting past.
Yeah. But then like on the other hand, it's like, okay, so maybe she faded a little bit at the end and lost a few minutes. Maybe she doesn't go out nearly that aggressive and then runs up to that same exact time. It's hard to say.
I think sub 22 is definitely doable. And
I agree.
I thought she was going to get it based on the first, 16 hours of her race.
Yeah. Oh, Finn, that reminds me. One thing you were right about though was like the collective fastness of the top 10s. You said that the men's, especially the women's top 10 was going to be like historically fast. You were right again. Good work. Congratulations.
Yeah. Well, maybe batting 300 or 400, which I don't know in predictions. I don't know how good that is, but yeah.
I'm trying to remember. I think you also said that on the men's side, the course record would not go down, but in the women's side, the course record was threatened. I think you also called that. So kudos.
Yeah, we'll read off the actual numbers. Thank you, Aid Station Fireball. But, a few finishing time metrics here. It was fastest third place women's finisher ever, Marianne Hogan, over 70 minutes faster than the previous fastest third place. And then fastest 10th place women's finisher ever, which was Lucy Bartholomew this year. And she was an hour 45 faster than her own 10th place from last year and over 90 minutes faster than the previous fastest 10th place finisher, which was Casey Lichtag in 2018. So it was like significantly faster. And then men's podium and 10th place were very similar to actually last year and the year before that.
Okay, here's a question. And the answer is probably very subjective, although I currently feel that there is way more room for improvement on the UTMB course than there is on the Western States course for the elites in our sport. That's just my personal opinion. Just a frame. Do you feel like the women's top 10 collective performance at UTMB this year was more impressive than the Western States performance top 10 or vice versa? Brett, what do you think?
I didn't get a chance to like really look at the top two and like scrutinize. Like the knee jerk reaction is Western States, but that could just be biased from being there in person and seeing it. But I feel like you said, I feel like there's still more room for the collective improvement in terms of the Western States playbook, or not the UTMB playbook of success. I don't think it's been fully written yet. Whereas at Western States, there's definitely still some chapters to rewrite, but there's a lot of things at Western States as of right now where it's like, we need to be focusing on these things. I'm going Western States, top 10, more impressive.
Okay.
I'm not sure about that. I'm like, I was just trying to sort the Western States results so I could just see them by...
yeah, I was buying you time so you could have a much more factual answer.
By gender there. But, I mean, the the top 10 at UTMB were pretty all time. And
Yeah.
I don't think Esther had like the race of her life at UTMB. I also don't think she had a bad race, but if we just want to use her as a potential comparison, she was third at Western States and she was 13th at UTMB. If we want to look at Emily Hawgood, I mean, we had enough women who ran both to be able to draw some lines, but Emily ended up 6th at UTMB. Emily was, fourth at Western States. What I feel like we see with Western States is the women in the last couple of years have just like cracked the code, and the top 10 have gotten so much faster there. This top 10, I mean, I guess we've kind of seen it at UTMB too. We just talked about it, like 90 minutes, an hour and 40 minutes faster, or whatever, for the 10th place finisher. We're seeing a pretty similar thing with Western States over the last couple of years. To me, I'd say the UTMB top 10 was a more impressive top 10. And I would say that's also just because they're doing a better job of making it a world's style race. Just with the amount of USA presence at Western States and how limiting it is to get into, I think it's going to be harder to get the same caliber of talent at Western States than it is to get at a race like UTMB with how many actual runners started? Like 1,800? Isn't that typically about right?
Yeah, I think it's in that upper, like around 2,000 mark.
Yeah. Such a
It's a lot
different
of people.
opportunity for competition.
Yeah. I want to.
Then what do you think?
Well, I'm in the camp of the UTMB top 10 collective performance being more impressive, but I mean, I think the baseline is they were both, incredibly important in terms of moving the sport forward, moving women's participation forward, and like they're both already in like hallowed grounds. Like, the baseline is they're both amazing. I'd pick one of the two. I'd go UTMB just because I think there's probably more room on that course. Like I just think we're going to get to this era 2 or 3 years from now where we are at, I think, with the women's race at OCC, where I think my bold prediction is that by 2026 at this race, every single woman in the top 10 will be under 24 hours.
Cool.
I firmly believe that.
You've been manifesting the fast time prediction, so like, hell yeah.
I mean, if 3 women can go well under 24 hours, why can't the entire top 10? I think that the depth is there. I think that there were 15 women in this race that could have been on that podium if they had the correct days. So I just think I think we're going to get to a point on the women's side where there's even more depth. There's probably going to be 30 or 40 people by 2 years from now that can do it. And just by virtue of a greater pool, I think it's going to happen.
Yeah, I would get behind that.
Couple shout outs from me. I wanted to give a couple shout outs in like outside of Katie. The first is Sabrina Stanley, improves her time here by nearly 90 minutes year over year, moves up 2 places in the process. I was watching the live stream. One of the commentators was remarking that they saw her, I think it was in Triant, might have been in La Folie, and all the racers around her were in a much more vulnerable state. They were kind of audibly expressing their suffering. Commentator said, Sabrina gives nothing away, just total poker face, like just classic Sabrina, total gamer. So I love that energy she brings to the race. Other one for me is Lucy Bartholomew. Really cool story here. 2nd consecutive top 10 as the field gets faster. There was a film that came out about her right after Black Canyon this year. Shout out Dylan Harris, who I think made it. It was a Solomon film. I think her and her coach, Jason Koop, talk about how she's in the middle of this sort of rebuilding phase of her career. There was that time back in like 2018 where she was on that trajectory to be the next Katie, the next Courtney, stuff like that. She's on an amazing redemption journey right now. Like I said, top 10 at this race is incredibly impressive, especially as the kind of the chips are moving and you have to be better year over year significantly. And then my last one is Marianne. Such a gamer. I don't want to like over dramatize or like overemphasize toughness and, DNFing or not DNFing at all costs. But every single year she's in this race, it seems like things just don't go her way. And she still manages to overcome. Missed all of last year rehabbing that leg injury, hip injury. And I just love seeing her race because nothing phases her. She'll crawl to the finish if she has to, which in this era where, all the incentives are to play the game only if it's kind of your exact day, she kind of bucks that, and I love it. So
yeah, love Marianne's style for that.
On the guy side, if I told you during your predictions that the US would only have 3 guys in the top 50, would you have believed it?
No, but I have something to say on that front. So I'll finish.
Oh, is your thing that you wanted to say that you chose Canyon Woodward for a low key top 20 spot or whatever?
Yes, dude. Canyon Woodward.
Yes, we Canyon.
American for hashtag yes, we Canyon.
Yeah.
Second American, still significantly improving year over year. 47th 2 years ago, 28th last year, now 20th. I have a little bit of a story. Canyon worked with me in Maine politics back in the mid 2010s. Huge respect for him because he was always in these Senate district battles, always an uphill fight. Somehow managed to get his candidate won. I knew he'd be a great ultra runner. He would always train, by the way, like on these back roads in Maine while in the height of campaign season. He's just a legend. And 20th at this race again, as the field continues to evolve. I love this guy.
I don't remember how you worded it, but it was like, this is like not quite a lock-in pick, but I'm going to say everyone else was doing top 10 picks and you were like, I'm going to say Canyon Woodward top 20. And he got 20th. When I saw that, I was like, wow, there you go.
Love that guy.
Yeah. But, as we think back on the DNF conversation, like maybe it's, not a pervasive overall thing, but it definitely was a problem for the men's US field in UTMB.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Finn, yeah. Should I address the prototype shoe take that got sent?
Dude, let's do a conversational pace segment here.
So the conversational pace proto alert. I'm definitely missing some, but so what was the thing said? Like basically, there seemed to be a lot less prototype new footwear on the feet of people this year. One of the big reasons for that is definitely due to Hoka. Well, the companies are getting a little bit better at disguising their shoes. So Jeff's just got to hold the poker face here on this one, but your boy Arthur leading UTMB at the front, he was wearing something that does not exist yet. Cool shoe. There was a lot of Hoka Tecton X 2.5s dressed up as 3.0s. Even a lot of the social media shoe sites reporting podiums and stuff got a lot of them wrong, thinking that any time they were wearing a thick shoe that was black and blue, it was a Tecton X3. That was not the case. Hayden, Adam Peterman, John Ray, Heather Jackson, Rod Farvard, they were all wearing the 2.5, which Vincent was wearing 2.5. Jim was wearing the 2.5. Ludo was wearing a new prototype that was dressed up at 2.5. That's neither of them. It was even thicker and just
Are you sure Ludo wasn't just wearing some 2008 Mafates?
I actually asked him and I got the greatest answer back because I just said ooh, nice shoes. And he just said a proto ... Peter Frano was wearing a prototype Scarpa on the CCC podium. Was it a Baptiste? I forget his last name. Who got second?
Shasang.
He was wearing a prototype Nike Kiger 10 that's not out yet. Tom Evans was wearing a custom Speed Ultra with a beefier outsole. That's all that I got on the top of my head.
I got a couple. Because I did, and I forgot to mention, I watched TDS. I watched a bunch of TDS. Shout out Jason Schlarb, legend, great performance on the American side.
Nord is 005.
Jeff, close your ears or whatever. Simone Gosselin was definitely wearing a super shoe. He was wearing on super shoe. I guarantee you he was wearing their super shoe. I seen it, okay? And then Christian Meyer on the Salomon side. He was poles, definitely some Salomon prototype poles. And then a really interesting pack. the back pocket on it was way bigger. And I noticed there was like an elastic band top, and he had a flask that was like horizontally situated kind of against the lower sternum, the lower back there. Not sternum, like the lower back. So I wouldn't be surprised if there's like a new advanced skin coming out sooner rather than later. But yeah, on the live stream, noticed both those things, like pole and pack. And I love putting, I'm not like an orange mud disciple or anything like that, but like the lower back.
Get out of here. Get out.
Get out.
Bring back hard bottles right behind my ears of just like.
Finn, are you trying to get turned into a meme? That seemed like a...
No, the milk thing already happened at Coca-Cola, so what do I have to lose? But the last thing I'll say, and Brett, I mean, Jeff, I know you know this, Brett, this would be like you and a kid in a candy store, but you got to be at UTMB next year because the tent city setup in the days before would be amazing for conversational pace.
I know. I do kind of love that UTMB is also turning into a trade show.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I think Topher Gaylord described it as like the Super Bowl, Burning Man, and the biggest trade show in like the space all wrapped up into one weekend. For me, it's interesting. Like I feel like the public perception of last year, like all this prototype buzz was mostly because of Terex launching, launching the like, I just spaced on the name of it. Help me out.
Speed Ultra.
Pace. Speed Ultra. Thanks. Last year, and like to be clear, it is like in Hoka's interest to make sure that no companies do that, right? Like Hoka as the premier sponsor of UTMB, as the primary sponsor, like they are owning Chamonix for that week. And I don't know if anything actually like happened on the kind of race relations side, but that was pretty bad form. Not for Adidas. Like Adidas crushed it. Terex had a huge shoe launch. It was really successful. A lot of people were buzzing about that. But like for Hoka to kind of let that go down and not have something planned that would create more buzz, in some ways, like, every brand is limited by the posters they can have in shops the week of UTMB. It's so kind of like locked down. I remember like joking about how skydiving and like having parachutes with your brand logo was going to be the only way to like really infiltrate the UTMB scene with guerrilla marketing. There wasn't
Brooks
a big...
did it.
Yeah?
Yeah, Brooks had a bunch of paragliders this year.
Yeah,
I think at the Geneva airport, they had these Brooks, like Scott Jurek. I was following Scott Jurek on Instagram, and he's like, "Oh, sick!" There was like a cool ad there in the Geneva airport exit for Brooks.
Yeah, so
it starts.
That was
Good
an
call,
idea for Black Diamond, like back in 2018, 2019. I'm pretty sure Ali Mack did it last year for Hoka. She also had a Hoka parachute, but like the point being, the fact that Terex pulled that off last year was pretty huge. I don't think it's like fair to expect shoe companies to be able to do these like, concealed, like super secret and then big public launches at something like UTMB year over year. That was a bit of an anomaly, but on my side, like I agree. I saw a good bit of prototype gear, and
you just got to squint a little bit harder now.
Yeah. Unless that company is like ready for that prototype to be talked about, you probably aren't really noticing it or hearing about it.
Yeah. That's really a lot of what it is, because it's like they don't want to talk about a shoe that's coming out in 2026. They want people to be excited about the shoes that are out right now.
Yeah, I'd say when people hear about prototypes, it's because they were supposed to hear about them, and that's coming from like me on my brand, like kind of product design side of things. Like, oh yeah, talk about that ski boot liner. Like we want some buzz created about that. But on the shoe side, like it's pretty explicit of like, okay, like the product manager for that space, for that product is like leaking it to some people so that the buzz is created.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think we've got time for maybe 2 or 3 more smaller topics. The first one, this relates back to Vincent, but I think it's worth mentioning because this actually generated the most pitchfork-esque responses in our DMs. By the way, if anyone has any problems in this episode, please send all of your hate mail to @conversationalpace. They will deal with it expediently.
Damn it.
They'll do a great job. Send it all there. Or send it to ZipFit. Send it to ZipFit.
info@zipfit.com.
Hey, I'll take it. Any plug's a great plug. We'll
no such thing as bad publicity.
Yeah, we will take your customer service questions for Singletrack and turn it into a pitch for why you need to learn how to ski and also buy some expensive ski boot liners.
Yeah,
but anyways,
I love that.
Here is the take, and I'm going to offer my opinion after stating it. The take is, and there was a tamale next to it, the emoji. Unlikely winners are less interesting content than elites doing battle. And my first reaction to this, and I'm going to get yours and Brett, you and Jeff in a minute. My initial reaction to this was in certain contexts. So I will admit that as soon as a lot of the names that I was the most familiar with were dropping left and right through the race, I became significantly less interested in the men's race, and the women's race became way more compelling to me. It wasn't until after and, listened to the Free Trail interview with Vincent and got more info on his backstory that I realized, wow, this is a fascinating guy, super cool. If I had known all this stuff mid-race, I would have identified more and it would have been just as captivating. So for me, it's contextual. These things, as long as you have a storyline after the fact to understand, you kind of connect the dots. But yeah, while they're unknowns, I find my attention wanes a little bit. Brett, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, that was actually that's almost my identical answer where, I had a whole list of people that I was ready to watch going into the race, and then they all dropped out. And I was like, well, that's not happening on the women's side. And I was like, then it was like, because I'm familiar with Katie's racing. I'm familiar with what she's done and capable of. And then it's like, is she really one-upping herself right now? And that was always super compelling to me. And, it was fun to see Vincent go off the front and then be like, is he going to get caught? Is this guy going to get caught? That's always exciting too. But yeah, I mean, in hindsight, I wish I knew more about him. But then that also goes back to the original question of if I knew more about him, then he's not an unknown. And then it does go back to yeah, then the people I do know make the race more exciting. Yeah, I think it's just it's a bummer that we weren't aware of him earlier.
I thought it was awesome. I was really jazzed. Basically, from when he came in to Courmayeur in first with Jarmon just right on his heels, I was totally gripped of this is such a sick race. We've got a relative unknown and being chased down by the best runners in the world. And when he continued to push on and push away, personally, I get excited when there's someone new to cheer for, and there were some real heavy hitters in this year's UTMB. The people I was pulling for the most were kind of either my friends or more underdogs. I know Jeff McGavro is going to knock it out of the park one of these years at UTMB, and people are going to be like, where did he come from? I thought, so-and-so was the top US talent for this race. But yeah, back to this participants and pros in the same race attitude. I think that this idea of every race should be Courtney versus Katie takes away from the Cat Bradley just got into Western States with one ticket and won the race. To me, those stories are probably the coolest because it's a little bit of the Buffy the Vampire Slayer trope of we're all superheroes and you have the power. You should go watch a whole 142 episodes. I promise it's worth your time. But that Vincent winning to me was maybe the most inspiring thing I've seen, in trail running in the last couple of years. And I think the staying power there is far greater than just a great battle. Hard to say. You guys bring up Trueheart Brown all the time as the random baller who won. I'd say one of the best races of all time goes back to Zach Miller and Hayden Hawks at TNF. And that's still one that people call back to. Yeah. So I would say that both have their place. In this case, it was Arthur was in the mix the entire race. He ended up 6th. He was an early leader. He was, in 3rd for quite a while. You look at the names of the top 10, and like a lot of them were in the mix from the get-go and, showed up to like really mean business. I know that Arthur was trying to win UTMB. So like a lot of DNFs, but like I think his storyline is maybe the most provocative and certainly the most inspiring.
Yeah.
Mm. Dude, big props to Arthur for having like perhaps the only micro fade on the men's side of the race. Whereas like everybody else kind of around him exploded, shy of like Vincent. And like he did not explode. So that was just really impressive to see.
Yeah.
All right. 2 more. This is a good one. So people were just inquiring about all the stomach problems. And one of the questions posed was, does this 120 grams per hour of carbs trend, does it sort of, do cracks in this theory occur in overnight races? And is there something about, trying to do that at 3 a.m, 1 a.m, it's humid, all that kind of stuff? Does it start to throw into question everything that we now consider holy about high carb fueling, especially in the wake of, stuff like, for example, David Roche's course record at Leadville?
Well, I mean, the one thing that I think is getting somewhat overlooked is like the effort level and the glycogen burn rate for a 14-hour 100-miler versus a 20-hour 100-miler.
Yeah.
Like they're not holding the same heart rate and just running for 6 hours longer. Like it shouldn't be the exact same fueling plan. And I feel like right now people are still kind of in this mode of like, if I'm racing 100 and I want to win, I need to eat as much as I can, which like might be true. But then there's always like, but what about when you factor in the humidity levels going into like, and how humid it is through the night? Like, does that change your fluid intake? But what about your average heart rate, throughout this 20-hour race versus 15? Like, what does that mean in terms of your carbs per hour versus like what your own fat is that you're burning? Like, I feel like there's still so many contingencies more so than just like the simple grams of carbs per hour that's contributing to these stomach problems. Like I've like Ben Demon, he just published his race report and like he ate so much weird shit at Courmayeur, just like kind of in like I know I'm behind a little bit, like I got to get something. So he's like chugged miso soup, a Coke, gels, and then immediately threw it all up. It's like, there's that, there's that aid station component as well, them being like pretty far apart. And like, Jeff, like you had said, like the 6 p.m. start is weird.
It's weird. On the food side, it's really weird.
Yeah.
And like the Courmayeur, like I ate so much food there. And I think it actually like helped me a lot last year. Like the next kind of 4 hours was my like best feeling of the entire race. But the timing of the race is challenging. I do think, in the sense of controlling variables and race ideas, would be super interesting to do like an all-American ultra and every aid station just offer McDonald's, like fries and burgers, and like no other outside fuel is allowed, and force everyone to kind of go the same fueling route. But yeah, like I still go back to Orléans at Hard Rock last summer and just seeing how much he was eating at every aid station, like a full big Tupperware full of dinner of like rice, sweet potatoes. There's also a couple runners I know of who like at UTMB last year exclusively used gels the entire time. And like that's their safe space. So to each their own in terms of like understanding how your body works. I bet there's some correlation though to the trend of, everyone 120 grams an hour or whatnot, like being, talked about more and more, and people maybe force feeding past a point of comfort.
Mm-hmm. Especially at the hot early pace too, like doesn't help. Like when you're running that fast with a fully loaded pack as well, like the heart rate's elevated higher to the point where your stomach's not working the way it's supposed to. Like at the average 100-mile like beats per minute for them, sure, probably good. But like when they're like looking like straight down the barrel of like full lactate threshold, you're not throwing down 120 grams of carbs an hour for 6 hours and getting away with it. So I think it's
turn it into like the beer mile like side where you have to drink a beer per lap. It's like, oh no, at these aid stations you have to eat an entire Quiznos sub or whatever it is.
Hot dog.
Yeah, like that's part of this race is actually getting through all of the required food to do the race. Would be pretty interesting, but like there's definitely overeating. I've had a couple burritos and then gone running and been like, having a couple burritos was a bad call.
Yeah. It's finicky. I think finicky.
Inspiration.
Yeah,
I was just wordsmithing.
That's my 120 grams of carbs an hour take. Where I think it can be good, but I think in a lot of cases it's a lot for a race this long.
I was just gonna say, Finn, based on your like 100 mile weeks or whatnot, the 120 grams of carbs and the super shoes, like I don't want to say it incorrectly, but the Mary
hug, Mary kill,
kiss, Mary kill. There it is, kiss, Mary kill. Like in this case, at least looking at the men's side, Vincent with the super shoes and what sounds like a pretty steady, consistent mileage training. Who knows what his diet was? Sounds like he got some secrets from Jim. Yeah, hard to have that takeaway from this race in comparison with something like Western States, where it is just like less variables.
Mm-hmm. The other thing that I think about was how many of these people had stomach bugs or some sort of sickness that crept up mid-race. That's number one. And then B, how many of these people that went high carb on race day were adequately / appropriately training their gut to handle that on race day? Like maybe they buy into the philosophy. Were they actually doing it? It's you don't know until you talk to them personally. But
and I've heard this thing about Chamonix, and let me know what you think, but I've been told by a few people that when Cham gets like to full capacity, sometimes in some of the places, the water can get a little iffy because of how much is like getting expelled. The city's like hit its limit, and some people don't have the stomachs to handle the water that then gets pushed through the faucets when there's that many people in the city.
Interesting.
Full rumor, but that's what I heard. Some people were like, don't drink the tap water when there's this many people in Cham.
Bring a rice cooker and bring a Brita filter.
Yeah.
The rice cooker, that's a OG throwback.
It's Tom Evans' playbook.
I think that's also maybe Claire Gallagher and Dylan Bowman were on the rice cooker train back in the day.
Yeah.
Yeah, I bet some of it also has to do with like, I'm in France and Chamonix. Like, wow, this red wine's great.
You can drink from any stream you want.
Look at all this cheese at the aid stations that I've never tried before. I remember being at the aid station after Notre Dame, like climbing into the night, and like the aid station volunteers were speaking to me in French and asking like what I was looking for as I just looked at an array of a bunch of different cheeses and hard breads. And I was like, I guess one of each of these will do. Like, I don't know what I'm eating. Sounds good. Like, yeah. The aid station, like from salted water, which is a fascinating Euro aid station supply. It's like, think electrolytes, but instead it's just salt in water, like you're drinking seawater.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, I could kind of maybe get behind that. I mean, but did you hear about the newest aid station curveball to UTMB this year? It was
no.
SodaStream cola, not Coke, like not Coca-Cola brand Coke. Like they had legit like Soda Streams and were making their own UTMB branded SodaStream Coca-Cola, with their MO being that it's going to be more like environmentally, conscious, because they're going to be able to reuse the Soda Streams over years. I'm like, I don't know if what's better, buying 5,000 Soda Streams or just like buying the Coca-Cola and the jugs. I don't know, but that was what they said.
Isn't the idea with Coke like to have it be flatter as it is? Why are we hypercarbonating things?
Can you just give me a shot of the cola syrup?
There you go.
Yeah,
that actually sounds pretty good.
They did the job. Like, hold the water.
One interesting tidbit from Hayden's post-race interview with Free Trail was him talking about like the calculated move of drinking out of one of the faucets in the town, like the fountains, because it was going to be quicker than going into the aid station. I cracked a smile. Yeah, I cracked a smile, both being like, Hayden, you're ridiculous, and also like so much admiration and appreciation for that level of detail.
Yes.
Like, that's awesome.
That was super cool to hear. And like, yeah, I love it. Like, he gave himself home field advantage by studying that hard. I think, what did he say? He was out there 7 or 8 weeks before the race and, doing workouts on all of the climbs and had numbers for splits and knew like, this is going to be faster. I'm going to fill my bottle up at this station. Yeah, that's awesome. That was so cool.
I think before we close up, we just do final thoughts, and we can either each do final thoughts or you guys can riff off mine, but either works. I'll go first. I think I have to just be open about this. We are basically a year removed from a moment in the sport where, people like Jim Walmsley were posting on Strava saying, where are we racing next August? And Killian and Zach theoretically putting together alternative options for next year and wondering where the rest of the pros kind of fell on that. You had the Gary Robbins situation, the Corinne Malcolm situation. It was tough times. And I think I'd be lying if I said I was totally uncertain whether we would be doing this episode, if the race would have the same flair. For the most part, things were unaffected, but I don't think it was all bad or unworth it. I think that a lot of stuff came out of it that was good. And I think it's important to keep encouraging that kind of dialogue in the sport. I think one cool example that I came across from this year's race that just popped up on my Instagram feed today, which kind of motivated me to even bring this up, was Andy Simmons. He finishes this year's UTMB in 24th place, 23:38. For his capability, probably a slight off day. But what was interesting is he crosses the finish line holding up this car hubcap that says drive greenwashing out of trail running, which is awesome. And I love that UTMB has gotten to the level of popularity that political statements can be made. And for the record, if someone crossed the finish line with a hubcap that said, whatever, give fossil fuels a second chance, I would be just as proud of them for taking a stand. I'm not just stoked because it's like a left-leaning eco
But did he
stunt.
start with the hubcap?
But did he start with? I don't think he did. I don't know.
DQ.
But I want to bring all that up because I think I definitely don't agree that like all of the social media that happened and all of the outrage that happened last fall was just all trolls and nonsense activism. I think there was a lot of good stuff that came out of the online reactions. I think that there were a lot of positive things that came out of it in place for this year that, kind of flowed into athlete empowerment. So yeah, if I could encourage anything to the audience and the athletes, it would be, continue speaking your mind if you think something is wrong, and just make sure you do it in a constructive way and without personal attacks involved. But don't just, you don't have to be kumbaya all the time. You don't have to fall into these vague notions of like, let's all come together. If you think something's wrong, keep speaking out. And I just love that Andy Simmons did that. So that's my final thought.
Yeah. I mean, I do have to give UTMB a little credit. I do think that they did a better job of covering the women's races than last year.
Sure.
Like they stayed live longer on purpose. They had cameras on more than just first place female longer. We did still see like pretty extended cuts of like dudes cutting open wheels of cheese. but I don't think that was at the expense of missing sections of the women's race. There was even a couple times, I believe, I saw it for sure at CCC when like they were interviewing the men, and then just full on like mid interview question, just cut straight to, like Tony McCann coming up one of the last climbs. Like they just did it. And we're like, those people are already done. Like they're getting interviewed, whatever. We're going straight to the women's race. I thought they did a good job of like continuing to just cut to the excitement of the racing
For sure.
on both the women's side. So I got to give them credit for that like conscious attempt to improve, the equal viewership of the races.
Yeah, I meant to wear my Here for the Women's shirt, Here for the Women's race shirt, but I forgot to. I was going to say at Courmayeur, I think it was Anna Frost was commentating, and she even like called out like, hey, it's coming up on 5 or 6 a.m. my time, like in Italy. We're going to be switching over to Arnevu, where Maëlle is next. I'm sad to say that because only 4 women have been through Courmayeur, but like that is the schedule. And, quite frankly, I think she probably had to go to bed, and like they were shifting the resources. It was at an hour where for at least in North America spectating, like I was also kind of getting ready to go to bed, but cool that she addressed that publicly, like on the feed. I think UTMB was a more compelling event this year than any year previously. I think the races all were like really fun to watch. I think the live stream was improved, maybe missing my favorite commentator, but yeah,
Agreed.
the races were super high caliber, and back to that women's UTMB field, like 9 different nations in the top 10. Hard to argue with that. This is the like status quo for a world championship event that happens year over year in the trail running space. Everything that happened last fall in terms of that movement of, kind of pushback, let's think about what we have from that. Like we have a really strong pro trail runners association. Yeah. We have a women's pregnancy trail policy fund that came out of that. We have pregnancy policy, both for the elite races and then also trickle down to a lot of the brands and contract level. So like it is, if anything, proof that when we see some sense of wrongdoing, like all speaking up about it is, the best way to make movement. And I go back, I think it was your conversation, Finn, with the PR guy for Ironman. Yeah, Paul Huddle. That was a phenomenal conversation. And like, the only way that things become relatable is when the people at these organizations are willing to have these conversations and make them relatable and like take that like Ironman brand or mask off and actually show like the good-natured and good-hearted people who are trying to create something positive. The Dacia like last minute sponsorship change in July of last year was like, that was a bullshit move. And like, I understand why some people were really upset about that. I don't think anyone should have been quite as upset as like Hoka, as, having that kind of primary sponsorship spot stripped in some ways, but kudos to Andrew Simmons for doing that. And yeah, like I expect that this event will go on, and continue growing in momentum. I'm certainly considering about trying to go back next year. And like, there's only so many like reunions where you get to see a bunch of your friends in one place. And my friend Maya Von Wadke crushed it. She got 18th at CCC. But like, she was like, my parents were really hoping to see you and you weren't here. And I was like, yeah, I was doing house projects, but like, there is that element of like, it's also a great place to connect with people, whether you're racing or not.
Last thing from me. And I think if you build an audience or a consumer base over time, it's inevitable that you'll face criticism. Like Brett and I mean, I moonlight as a contributor to Conversational Pace, and I was looking at our comment section from our Super Shoe review, and this one person says basically, you guys effing suck. And that's inevitable, right? Like if you do anything worth building, there's going to be a percentage that strikes back. And I think the key, and I think UTMB has done a progressively better job of this over time, is you have to flow with it. You got to be receptive to it. You cannot just close ranks and get insular. So yeah, anyways, you guys are awesome. I had a ton of fun. Looking forward to the next one already. And yeah, it's Tuesday, September 3rd. So I'm going to try to turn this around like tonight if we can.
Hell yeah.
Peace.
Eric LaPuma. Peace. 11th. That was the best battle.
Oh my gosh, the sprint finish. You're right. How did we not talk about that?
Yeah.
There we go. We talked about it.
Arnaud, Bonina, and Eric had to throw it out there.